Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Stacks. I'm Christy Pearson with Friends of the Hennepin County Library. It is a pleasure to welcome you to our second virtual event in this award-winning series. Now, truth be told, we miss gathering together in person with all of you at the library and look forward to seeing you again soon. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us live from your homes. Now, on behalf of the library and friends, I would like to begin this evening with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that in Hennepin County, we live and work on the traditional and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. This land and the Dakota people belong together. And by offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Dakota sovereignty and aspire to hold ourselves accountable to the work of reconciliation. Thank you. Well, I'd next like to recognize the generous sponsors that help make tonight possible. A very special thank you to the Star Tribune and US Bank. Now, I'd like to next, as we get started, have a couple of insider tips to help you better enjoy your Zoom experience. First, if you would like to join the conversation, simply click chat in the bottom center of the screen. And please make sure to send those comments to all panelists and attendees. Next, if you would like to ask the author a question, click the icon marked Q&A at any time throughout the conversation. You can also give a big thumbs up to like a question that others have submitted, and this will increase the likelihood that a question will be asked. Towards the end of the program, our fabulous events manager, Rob Gowdy, will join us on screen to manage the audience Q&A. So start asking those questions. Here now to introduce tonight's guest is our Friends Board Member Extraordinaire, Rosa Marroquin. Welcome, Rosa, and I hope all of you enjoy the show.
Thank you, Christy, and good evening to you, our library patrons and friends. I'm Rosa Marroquin, and I'm thrilled to join you tonight for this exciting conversation with the legendary Julia Alvarez. I so wish she was here in person tonight. Her writing brings me a lot of joy. She captures the passion and the personalities that are very familiar to me from my childhood. When I was away from home at school or traveling, these voices were with me wherever I picked up one of her books, How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents, or her 1997 book, Yo. She has a knack for weaving the complexities and nuances of language and culture and bringing them to life. The bond of the sisterhood, the generational voices, and in her new book, The Realities of Our Latino Immigrant Community, she shows us life can be messy, yet filled with hope and always sprinkled with laughter. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our special guests. Tonight's moderator, Anika Fajardo, is a writer, editor, and teacher. She was born in Colombia and raised in Minnesota. Her book, Magical Realism for Non-Believers, a memoir of finding family, was named Best Nonfiction Book of 2020 by City Pages. Her debut novel for young readers, What If a Fish, was released earlier this year. And our guest of honor, Julia Alvarez, left the Dominican Republic for the US at age 10. She has since authored 6 novels, 3 books of fiction, 3 collections of poetry, and 11 books for children and young adults. She has taught and mentored many writers across America, and until her retirement in 2016, was a writer in residence at Middlebury College. Her novel, In the Time of the Butterflies, was selected by the NEA for its National Big Read program. And in 2013, President Obama awarded Alvarez the National Medal of Arts. Her latest book, Afterlife, was hailed by O Magazine as a gorgeously intimate portrait of an immigrant writer and recent widow, carving out hope in the face of personal and political grief. It is my great honor to welcome moderator Anika Fajardo and esteemed guest, Julia Alvarez, to the Talk of Stacks.
Thank you so much, Rosa, and thank you so much to the Hennepin County Friends of the Library. It's such an honor to be here and to be talking with one of my favorite writers, Julia Alvarez. Bienvenida, Julia. Thank you
Gracias.
so much for coming and for talking about your novel, Afterlife, which I loved.
Thank you so much, Annika, for doing this. And thank you to all of you at Talk of the Stacks and Hennepin County Library, Rosa, for your introduction, Christy, all the welcome. I just stepped outside and told my Midwestern husband from Nebraska, these people are so nice. They're so welcoming. So thank you so much. It matters a lot. And especially during this pandemic when we're all feeling so isolated, to feel so connected to your community.
It's amazing that we can be together even when we're not together. I wish I could see you in person, but this is the next best thing, right? I'm a huge fan of yours, and it's funny that Rosa mentioned how the Garcia girls lost their accents and Yo, which were the ones that I was going to mention too, as some of the books I read early on that were the first ones that gave me an idea that someone with a Latino background could become a writer, and to see myself reflected in those stories just meant a lot to me at that time. And I've continued to be a huge fan of yours. Afterlife reminded me a lot of Saving the World. There was something very similar to me in that novel, and also in your young reader book, Something to Declare. So I kind of felt like those two were reflected a lot in this one. And it's an absolutely beautiful book, and I really identified with the main character, Antonia. And I think that, one of the things that I thought was really interesting is the way that Antonia kind of challenges the stereotype of Latino immigrants and a Latino woman. So she's, accomplished, and she has had this amazing career. She's educated, she's financially comfortable. But then she's got these 3 Dominican sisters, and they kind of play off of the stereotypes, right? I love the way they kind of embrace some stereotypes and some of this racial profiling, and some of it they just wanna, they don't like at all, right? So they kind of pick and choose what they like, what they don't like. And then Antonia herself engages in her own type of stereotyping with the immigrant family, Mario and his girlfriend, and then also the whites in the story too, the sheriff and the farmer next door. And she chafes, there's a line that I thought was really, really interesting. She says she's annoyed at the idea of the moral profiling based on her ethnicity. And I thought that really struck me. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the idea of moral profiling and its role, both in the book and maybe, broader too.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Annika. And just not to make this like a, mutual admiration society, but why not? I was telling Annika, I just finished her memoir, and it is so absorbing. And there were so many things that, again, resonated with me and even helped me to look at our cultures, because they're varied. And that I'm glad you noticed that, because one of the things I was really interested in is, when we talk about diversity, we have to also think about that within our particular ethnic groups and racial groups, that we're not all one broad brush, and especially the Latinx community in this country. We've come from different places. We have different racial backgrounds. We have different religious backgrounds. It's complicated. And one of the things I sought out to do with my character, Antonia, was I wanted a complicated woman, not the stereotypes we're used to. Once you have I also wanted an older Latina, because I've seen a lot of stories about coming of age and coming into your own and finding yourself. But what about the later part of life? But I wanted to get at the complexity, that you're not all abuelitas, you're not all curanderas, that just because you're, from a Latin background, it doesn't mean that you're for this politics or that politics, or people assume this. but it's not just, of course, you notice too, it's not just people do it to Antonia, but she does it. Oh, the farmer next door, he's a certain kind. The sheriff has to be this way. And it's the way that we kind of reduce people and put them in containers, and we don't allow them their full complexity. And part of the thing that I wanted for her is she's constantly being surprised by how her assumptions don't pan out. And, I want that, what you do with a novel is you don't have answers, but you lead people through an experience that hopefully enlarges them too, not because you're going to settle things for them. In fact, you're going to complicate things for them. So I really wanted that with this character, to grant her the full complexity, because I think that's the way we really fully respect people, by, seeing their variety and complexity.
Well, and you also see Antonia struggle with these moral decisions that she's making. I think that gives it sort of this other layer of complexity for her. And as a reader, you don't always agree with the way she's going, right? But you empathize with her at the same time.
Well, as a writer, you know, a lot of times with your characters, you want them to be a certain way or do a certain thing. And the minute you do that, your story starts to fold in on itself and die, because you want certain things. You want sometimes people to be better than they are. But part of what I wanted to get to is that I think what makes people interesting, what makes Antonia, I hope, interesting, is that you struggle with the questions. You don't have pat answers, and you don't always make the right decision. But your asking is a way of, that for me is being a moral person. Not that you've got it all settled, this is right, this is wrong, you do this or you do that. That's easy. You struggle with what does it mean, the three questions she loves from Tolstoy, you know, what is the right thing to do? Who is the most important, etc. You know, you ask Antonia asks herself that.
Yeah, and I think she, because she's always asking these questions, you forgive the things that you maybe don't agree with her choices. And then she kind of learns from her choices and makes different ones next time, which I think it's satisfying as a reader to find that, because it kind of gives you permission in your human life to be okay, to just keep learning from those things. One of the things that I thought was really timely, she says that everyone is barricaded against the suffering of others, which I think is so wise and rings so true, especially now. Obviously, you wrote this before the pandemic. And then, but she's also, so she kind of sees these kind of separation between her pain and other people's pain. But at the same time, she's trying to embody her loved ones, her husband, and later her sister, to do the right thing, even though she doesn't really want to do the right thing, or doesn't really know what the right thing is necessarily. And I think that probably a lot of people are feeling like that right now too, because how do we help? How do we move things forward? How do we make the world a better place when we're just trying to make it through the next Zoom meeting?
Right.
So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that idea of wanting to do more, and do we do enough? And what do you think, does Antonia feel like she's doing enough?
Well, I think it's good that you notice, even though this was a pre-pandemic book, even before the pandemic made it so clear to us, I felt very much that we were living in what I call elegiac times. By that I mean seeing the end of so many things. You know, so many things were falling apart. The world was coming undone. Climate change, species going extinct, coastlines going underwater, terrible storms, terrible fires, the divisiveness and the loss of a civic society, violence in communities of colors. I mean, it just went on. And I felt like things were dying, things were falling apart. And my struggle and my you know, telling the story through this character is, how do we live in a broken world and not lose faith in each other or ourselves? Like, what is the right thing to do? How do you, you know, as things come apart, how do you try to live the larger version of yourself and try to create that more beloved community that we all talk about? And not just an easy answer, because then you have to put yourself in the equation, and the fact that you don't know and that you have these other impulses. So, but I think that asking the questions is an important first step. And that's one thing that I think the pandemic has brought forward, that many of us are questioning things. And one of the touching things is that we're all in this learning curve together. No one knows what to do. You know, we're all trying to figure it out. You know, we're older, so we're quarantined. My husband has a serious lung disease, so we're quarantined, especially because of that. So we feel very helpless sometimes, but we grow most of our own food here, and we do harvest. And so we do drop-offs, you know, we go take things to the soup. It's things that feel sometimes so minor, but we figure out ways to try to contribute to our community. But we don't know the answers. We just ask ourselves the questions. And I think that asking ourselves the questions is so important, because once you have the answers, then you start judging the people who don't agree with it and the people who do, the people who are doing it wrong, the people who are doing it. And that doesn't take us anywhere but more divisiveness. So, you know, what's the groundswell? What the mother says in Afterlife. She said, you know, Antonia remembers that her mother-in-law always, when there was a hard moment, would just say, she didn't know what to do. She just rolled up her sleeves and say, well, let's see what love can do. I think that's a great question, you know.
Yeah.
Whether we get the answer right or not, it's the right question.
And I think you get this idea that I mean, even you bringing, you know, doing your small bit and in your corner of the world, and Antonia like translating for the local community. It's easy to feel that that's just a really small thing, that it's not going to make a big impact. But, you know, I mean, you know, small things add up, right? When everyone is doing these small things. And I don't know that, do you think that Antonia decides that that's okay, that that's what she's going to, you know, that that's how she embodies her loved ones?
Well, I think it's also important to remember that she's grieving, you know, and grieving, you know, grieving is, you know, a hole in your heart, you know, and she is just trying so hard to contain her grief so she doesn't, you know, spill it over into other people and become a burden to them. She's very into, you know, careful self-management to just keep the dragons at bay, you know. And you try, but it shows up at your door or in your garage, you know. And here she is, you know, she's lived by these beautiful works and these beautiful words. What happens when the words aren't enough? And what they are addressing shows up as a real person in a real situation at your door. What do you do then? And we all have excuses. She's grieving. She's alone. She can barely manage, you know, to contain her grief. Soon her sister has disappeared. And, you know, she doesn't know where her loyalties lie. So, you know, she's trying to manage it all. And I think, again, the thing that's hopeful is that she's trying to understand and live concientizada, you know, awake to what's out there, and stay open while acknowledging her own little critter impulses, her own little needs and her own little biases, because that's also you. And if you repress that, it shows up as another one of those dragons that you then have to keep at bay.
Right, right.
So you have to acknowledge that, you know, you have to, what is it that the therapist says to her? If you try to be me, who will be you, or something?
Yeah, yeah, that struck me. Kind of the other side of you might as well be yourself because everyone else is taken. Doesn't somebody?
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Um,
So at the very end of the book, it's the beauty of the Japanese repair technique that it seems gives Antonio some peace. And she says, art reminds us that we're all connected, which to me seemed like that could be a magnet on her fridge. And I think I would buy that magnet for sure.
Yes.
But she's questioning, like, is art enough? And is she off the hook helping because she's written poems that have like inspired sick people? You know, she has brought joy to people, right, with her poetry, and is that enough? And I think, I know, as you know, as a writer myself, I feel like, should I be writing fiction right now, or should I be out protesting or out giving blood, or, you know, whatever kind of thing? How do you, what's that line between how badly do we need art, how badly do we need action, and what role art, I just been thinking about this a lot, what role does the art play in our recovery and our survival, especially during the pandemic?
Well, I think it's vital, but it's not the only thing. I think we don't nourish our souls, and it will come back to haunt us. And I think the arts are deeply nourishing to our souls. You know, they don't, they're not political, they're not big, they're not this or that, but they are the springs that feed us. And we need them. We need them. We need them even to be effective activists. We need to be nourished, or we get strident and angry and tight and dry, and we're not good to anybody. You know, Howard Thurman, the civil rights activist, once gave advice to young people by saying something like, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And I really think that that's, you know, important, that we discover what it is that is our gift. That's what gives meaning to our lives. And the purpose of our lives is to give it to others. So that giving to others is what activism is. It's getting out on the streets, is, you know, using your gift to make effective change, to feed others. And we have to be, you know, one of the things that is also we're learning with this pandemic is to be forgiving and generous of the ways that each person, you know, handles that, to respect that it won't always be the same.
That we all have, yeah. So you and your husband are quarantining completely, and other people are, you know,
well, we also,
you know, everyone is making choices.
Well, I wish I had known earlier about you, because I did start a project with, it's a project for women artists, activists. It's called the Scheherazade Project. And it's based on my favorite character, my muse, Scheherazade from the Arabian Nights, who tells stories to save her life and the lives of all the women in the kingdom, because there's a cruel sultan. So for 101 nights, we began on July 25th. Check it out. Initially, we were going to go in front of the White House. Every night, a different woman artist would do a presentation, read a poem, tell a story, dance a dance, play a piece of music, and we've gone virtual. So every night at 8 p.m. till the eve of election, one of the sister Shahrazats tells a story. So we've had, on Saturday, we're going to have the poet laureate Rita Dove. Tonight, as we speak, Ada Limon is our sister. Yesterday, we had our youngest one, a neighbor who writes wonderful poetry, an Iranian 15-year-old, Nargis. She was our Shahrazad. Every night, we've had dancers, we've had painters, musicians. And part of it is these are women who are activists, and they want change, and they want generosity, and they want a more enlightened, informed leadership in this country that brings us together instead of tearing us apart. So it's called the Shahrazad Project. So it was me also feeling like we've got to do something besides just create our art. And this was a way to put it out there. And we've been amazed at the responses and how many artists have signed up. And, it's been really exciting and thrilling and brought us together. Yeah.
Yes, that's so beautiful to make something out, something good out of art and action. Make action.
The message every night, before and after the performances, we're expressing our art. You use your voices to express what you want. Get out and vote. So at the end of every performance, we have to be sure you register to vote. Where to go vote in your by what time to register in your different states. So we've had this, it's also hooked with voting and getting out the vote.
Well, it strikes me that this idea of, art seeing us through, but art also is a way that breaks down those barriers between people suffering, right? So we can't understand somebody else's experience, but we can if we can get it through art. I mean, people are depending on art to get them through the pandemic by watching TV and binging on Netflix, right? I mean, yeah. That's storytelling in art too, right?
Right. Oh, exactly. How you deliver the story will be different. We understand this from Latino cultures. They're oral cultures. Many times things were written down. When I went to graduate school in creative writing, I realized that most of the things that I was being taught in these workshops by these professors, I had learned from people in my childhood, some of them who couldn't even read or write. But the sense of timing and storytelling and audience and character, they had it down. So that it's that storytelling is part of, it's what we do instead of make honey or silk, like silkworms. We're creatures of narrative. We make meaning with the stories that we tell, and we need it now more than ever because we don't understand what's happening to us. I mean, this is, we're all hit with this, and so it's an effort to tell stories, to make meaning. And the other thing that we learn from reading and being readers, not just being writers, is that reading has always been about being together apart. You feel deeply connected, but the people aren't there. They could have lived 100 years ago, 200 years ago, but you feel like these people. And the other thing that reading does, I think it's a radical thing it does, which is so important. When you read, think about what you do. When you read, you become the other. You become the other. And if that's a skill that we need right now, to imagine the other, instead of just our people, our group, that's what reading, I think it's the same muscles of compassion that we use also when we engage with a story. And I can't help but think and hope that by being readers, we become more enlarged in our compassion and capacity to understand. So I think reading is how you really, change people from deep inside.
the ultimate kind of empathy, road to empathy, right? To see these other parts of the human condition.
Right.
I recently watched a webinar with some scholars on Gabriel Garcia Marquez. That was a partnership between the National Humanities Foundation, what is it? And the Colombian government. And so they had some people talking about kind of that. But they talked a little bit about the storytelling and the idea that Latin American culture or literature, whatever you want to call that, is shaped so much by language, by the fact that the Spanish came in and conquered these places, and all of a sudden this language came in. And I know that I've heard magical realism being a kind of a response to colonialism also. And so I don't know, what do you think about sort of this idea of language and how we portray story through language, and how that changes? As you know, you use a little bit of Spanish in your books, and Antonia does the translating, and she's still, you know, sees the Mexican immigrants and can communicate with them, which is such a barrier, right? Another barrier that she's able to break down. So just that language piece.
Yeah, well, I think that part of it is that I'm glad you brought up magical realism, because I loved what you did with that in your book. And I remember when I learned the term magical realism, you know, in graduate school, and I went home and with Gabriel Garcia Marquez's, you know, 100 Years of Solitude, and gave it to Papi. And I said, Papi, I want you to read this book. It's this new thing called, you know, magical realism. And he read the book. He said, magical realism, that's the way we think. You know, to sort of complicate, because this is a memoir of finding family. My father is the youngest of 25 kids. The first wife had 10 kids, and she died, not in childbirth, amazingly. The second one had 15. My father's the youngest of them. So he's right in that Buendia, you know, thing of 100 Years of Solitude. And it's so much, you know, we're such a mixture of cultures, of religion. You know, the Catholicism came in, but there were native indigenous religions. And, you know, the Spaniards decimated the indigenous people in the DR, but their language and their foods and so much of that culture stays with our language and with our belief systems, you know, that it hasn't disappeared. You know, Galeano, that wonderful, our wonderful Latin American poet historian, says, history never says so long. History says, see you later. You know, and it's here, it's in our language, it's part of, you know, when you have an oral culture, you don't have a text to return to. So everything is encoded in the language. And the things you can't say, right? You don't put them in a book that you can hide away. You encode them in these fantastical things that happen, but actually are ways of, you know, communicating with each other, important information that we mustn't forget and we need to transfer from one to the other. So I think magical realism, people see it as so fantastical. It's encoded language, you know, it's poetic language. You know, it's what we do in poetry. We put it in a symbol or a metaphor or an image or a rhythm or a cadence. And so I think that's, yeah, very much a part of our traditionally oral cultures.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you're a poet too, and well, you write everything, right? I use your A Wedding in Haiti when I teach creative nonfiction, because I love that. I've been using that book for years. I love that one. And Antonio talks about the way her husband reads, which is skimming, which is the way I read. I was trained as a librarian, and part of the job is to read really fast. So I am not a good poetry reader because I read too fast, like Sam. And but can you talk a little bit about the prose, the actual writing in this book, particularly the fact that you don't use quotation marks for the dialogue? I have a feeling people ask you a lot of questions about that.
Well, I wanted to reduce, and I see it in younger writers, because we think, oh, now I'm the viejita, I'm the one that knows. No, I learned so much from reading your memoir, and I learned from writers. I mean, I just, Henry James said his advice to young writers is be him, and I'm adding, or her, on whom nothing is lost. So wherever you're learning something, and so one of the things that I wanted to do with Antonia is I wanted to make it increase the intensity and interiorness of even the dialogue as she moves through the world. And there is a kind of artificiality to quotation marks. It's kind of like the proscenium stage. It is caged and it's very much put out there. And I wanted it to be more in the reader's internal, that it becomes a rhythm of how we really are, that what we say out loud and what we're thinking is in constant play with each other, So yeah, I wanted to do that in terms of the structure of the book. I also, coming from our cultures where we've talked about, how the magical realism, the rococo language, the many people and characters, the flora and fauna just bursting all over the place. I come from that kind of sensibility and tradition. So I have novels that are often multiple points of view, and stories go off on stories. And I've always admired those short lyrical novels. And I call it a Japanese sensibility, kind of the haiku sensibility, where you strip everything that's non-essential away so that what remains is charged. And I thought that structure, and it's not like I knew it beforehand, it's as I worked the material, I wanted the structure to reflect that sensibility, that theme of a world in which so many things are falling away, a kind of world of, more and more things, more and more losses, things shed. And I wanted to do that even with the structure of the book, so that what remains is the essential. So I was making choices also based on that kind of approach to the novel. Because, as you near, I just turned 70 this year, and as you get older, you realize you don't have that much more time for all the things you want to do. But there's certain things that I've always wanted to try. And one of them was to write a short, kind of a novel that is in that border between novella and novel, poetry and prose. Because being a bicultural, bilingual, personality, I always feel transgressive when someone says there's a border. I want to push it one way or another. I want them to be porous, So yes, that was very much on my mind as I wrote Afterlife.
Oh, I love the idea of the border being porous, because that fits in with this idea of the Japanese repair. And you're so lucky to have such a gorgeous cover. Not only is it gold and sparkly, it also does that representation of the family tree kind of, and then that repair. And it's almost like those borders, especially as a bicultural person, where the border can be the beautiful part, right?
Right. I have to laugh when you said that, because we went, you don't know how many versions of a cover we went through. And my editor and publisher will be delighted to hear you say that, because at first I said, no, 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 this isn't right. It's too glowing. It's too, yeah. And they were determined. And I think they were right. It's gotten so many compliments. But I have to say, I can't take the credit at all. You know. Well, didn't that happen with your novel? I mean, you know, they send you a cover and you go, well, I don't know, you know, because we've been doing words and narrative, and all of a sudden to have, you know, of course,
visual.
Yeah.
It's very strange. It is.
Suddenly have it be a cover. Although with your artist genes coming from your father, as we learned in this story, you probably have a better sense of artistic look of what your story, what your cover should look like. I didn't.
But did you already, what got you interested in that idea of the Japanese repair? That's where they break the glass, the china, and then put it back together.
I read about it, and it really intrigued me that it's a sensibility whereby instead of hiding something that's broken, you repair it and you actually lacquer the places where it was broken, and you put a gold, you know, kind of lacquer on it so that it shows where it has been broken. That in a sense, it's like people that say, heck, I'm not going to have, you know, cosmetic surgery. These are my sign of what I've lived through. I'm proud of my wrinkles, you know, and it's that same idea that, or, you know, I don't know if you have this when you're writing, that you have a soundtrack for the book, you know, music that sometimes you put on or hear. And mine for this was Leonard Cohen's song, the one that, the line, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And,
yes,
you know, and I very much admire that, you know, that it's our brokenness, not our perfection, but our brokenness that really opens us up to each other in the world. That's how the light gets in. And, you know, so I thought it was the opposite, you know, if you were perfect, that would be more loving and better. But no, it's your brokenness. Yeah. And I love that sensibility.
It's a great metaphor for the pandemic and what everyone is going through right now too. I think it's a very hopeful side to that.
Yeah.
But Julia, I could talk to you all night and all week.
This has been wonderful. Although, as I told you, it's so weird to suddenly meet you because I feel like I already know you from your book, and people should pick it up. It's a wonderful, wonderful memoir. And you two are crossing borders because you wrote, and yours is also a pandemic book, right? What If a Fish? When was it published?
In August.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, it's a terrible time to publish a book.
Or maybe not, because so many people, as you say, are reading and reading stories.
Hopefully. Well, I know people here have many questions for you. So I am going to turn it over to Rob, I believe, who's going to manage these great questions that are coming in. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Annika. Thank you, Julia, for that just inspiring and fascinating conversation. You haven't seen me yet tonight. My name is Rob Gowdy. I'm the events manager for Friends of the Hennepin County Library. And I'm joining to help you join the conversation. I'm scrolling through the Q&A queue here, and we're gonna ask your questions to Julia live. So please, if you haven't added your question yet, you can use the Q&A tool on the bottom center of the screen to enter your question. And let's get started. So Julia, our first question's from an anonymous attendee, and they ask, would you discuss your writing process as a bilingual author? Do you begin in one language, think in another while you're writing, translate your own books? Thank you for your wonderful stories.
Well, you know, I came to this country in 1960, and that was the pre bilingual education, multicultural studies, any of that. I mean, there wasn't even anything as such as um, women's studies departments or African American. I mean, it was just really, that was not taught. And I was not encouraged to keep my bilingual, to speak in Spanish. In fact, we would get in trouble with the teachers if they caught my sisters and myself speaking Spanish in the playground. So I was not encouraged to keep up my Spanish, except at home. So I maintain that home language, oral language, and therefore my Spanish is very much a childhood Spanish. I was never really trained in it. The language that I learned to craft is English. The one I think in, the one that I learned traditions and literature in is English. So I write in English. And I used to think I made an either or choice until I realized that in some ways I'm speaking my Spanish and English, my cadences, my, a lot of the imagery, the characters, the way I do syntax is so influenced by that original mother tongue. And I think it's part of what ethnic and immigrant writers have infused into American English, which makes it such an exciting, vibrant literature, is that all these different traditions, cadences, syntaxes, ways of looking in the world are brought into English and transform English. So I think that it's there, but I do write in English. I don't do my own translation. Just September 16th, the novel came out in Spanish, Más Allá, and a wonderful translator, Colombiana Anika, Mercedes School, translated it. But I also asked that a Dominican editor look it over, because the Dominican editor can catch those little places where it's, a Colombian vocabulary and not Dominican. And then I read it word for word. And even though mine is not a literary Spanish, I also could pick up places. And I was really impressed when my editor, Spanish language editor at Penguin, took all of my suggestions. He says, they're excellent suggestions. They really work. And so I thought, so I didn't lose it. So it's very much, Spanish is very much a part of my English, but I do write in English. And people sometimes say, well, they think they're going to catch me because they say, well, what are you dreaming? And I say, well, I don't know how to answer that.
Do you dream in magical realism?
Yes. No, but if I dream of my department chair, he's speaking to me in English. If my papi enters my dream, he speaks to me in Spanish. And it's just part of that, that keeps changing, and it's all part of me. That's really to be bicultural. That's, what it means.
What a wonderful answer. And I think we're going to follow up with another question about process. This one's from Jean. Jean asks, did you have the story in your mind at the outset of this book? And did it stay that way? Or did it change in ways that surprised you? Did you discover the ending or already know it?
I can't give a rule of this is the way to do things, because I have so many writer friends and they all do it so differently. I'm here in Vermont, Robert Frost's country, and Frost always said that no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. In other words, part of why I write is not because I know things, but because I want to find things out. So for me, it is a process of discovery, which means it is so messy and so many drafts and so many revisions to find the way to the ending. I don't have the ending. Sometimes, to comfort myself, I think I have the ending, and I'll be aiming towards it, and a character leads me in a new direction or a situation develops, that I leads me to follow it rather than, oh, no, 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 this is the way it has to go. And I love this prayer that I learned the Mayan weavers say before they're going to weave one of their fabrics. They do not have a pattern. Everything depends on the weather for the day, the dyes and how they took, how the fibers are acting. But when they kneel by their loom, they say a prayer, grant me the intelligence and the patience to find the true pattern. And I think it's beautiful. Grant me the intelligence, so that's craft, and the patience, that's humility, to find the true pattern. So that it's part of the way that I write, which means long hours at the desk, many frustrating, many thinking, I'm going to give this up, many years. But part of it is, people say, well, you write to produce. No, 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 no. You write because it's a way of life. The production, the publications are these little, punctuations along the path, but it is a way of life. It's the ongoingness of the work. And if you're only thinking of product and achievement and results, you're going to have a hard time. Or that's how I explain it to myself.
Well, we're certainly lucky that you continue to keep trying to find the true pattern, because obviously this book was so enchanting and we can't wait to see what comes next. We're going to switch topics a little bit. This question is from Marcy. As one of 5 children, I enjoy the family dynamic of your books. I especially relate to the family assigned identities, the wild one, the good one, the smart one, etc. Even when people outgrow that identity, they fall back into old roles when they're together. I would enjoy hearing about your childhood identity and how that has changed, grown since you have aged.
Oh, that's a great question. And, we were talking earlier about putting labels on people and stereotyping. You don't have to go out in the world too far. It happens within families, the kind one, the patient one, the easy one, the difficult one. If you come from a large family or with siblings, you get cubicled into these roles. And wow, what a surprise to go out and start your own life and discover, you can be patient too. Hey, you can do your checkbook, you can do math too. You can, all these things that were sort of siphoned off. So yeah, I think when I was growing up, actually, I was one of those kids that you would never have thought would be a reader or a writer. I flunked, and kids love hearing this, I flunked every grade through 5th grade. I hated school, I hated reading. It was a dictatorship school. Everything was by rote. Everything were these propaganda texts. And I think I actually was being very smart by being bored and not paying attention. And so the notes would come home. She doesn't pay attention. She doesn't sit still. But I would come home in the midst of this extended family, and one of my aunties, one of my cousins would say, hey, come here, I'm going to tell you a story. And I would sit there entranced and I wouldn't move. And then once they were done, I want them to tell it again and again. I had no problem paying attention. So my role was that everybody thought I was going to end up not be, kind of like the black sheep. And I was going to be problem, and, the thing was to try to tame me so that it, at least, because in our cultures in the 50s, growing up in the DR, girls didn't get much education. If they got a high school diploma, that was a lot. So the thing was, how could they sort of civilize me and make me, someone that someone might want to marry?
Well, I think
So,
Bill probably would say he was very happy with your education.
yeah, he's the one that knows how to cook and do all kinds of things, because I never learned much of anything. I was, it wasn't until I came to this country that I became a reader. And that was because I was so lonely and out of it and outcast that I discovered the world of the imagination. But so, yeah, my role was not, you would not have used it to sort of say, oh, this one is going to be the creative, writer and reader. A teacher? My teachers would roll in their graves thinking, she gave us such a hard time.
I think that's a great segue to a pair of questions here. The first one's from Amanda, and then the second one's from Anna. The first one from Amanda is, you mentioned Tolstoy's 3 Questions and Antonia. Are there any other philosophies that helped shape this novel? And then the question from Anna is, one of my favorite literary allusions you continuously return to is "That Way Lies Madness" from King Lear. Did you intend a connection or echoing between Antonia's story and Lear's? So a 2-pronged question about what were your philosophical underpinnings and this literary allusion to King Lear. Were you working Lear into your story?
Well, I think I think we've talked a little bit about the Japanese philosophy, which is so much the philosophy behind haiku too. The philosophy of the essential, the simple, the stripping away, the looking at what is the most important. You could call it the soul, you could call it the essence. I think that's very much a sensibility of the novel. I think part of the novel also questions, when you bring up Lear, all these beautiful works that have influenced her, Antonia. And as of course Antonia inherits a lot of my literary DNA. So many of the things she loves and quotes are quotes and loves that I have. And of course, Shakespeare is such a huge, compassionate imagination and sensibility. How can it not, influence Antonia, and has influenced me? But part of the thing is that I'm also turning on that and saying, okay, these are great philosophies. These are beautiful works. But what happens when it's not Lear on the heath, but it's your very own sister wandering crazy across the landscape? What do you do then? What do you do when it's not, Hamlet making a decision about what is the moral course, but it's you, because there's someone in your garage who you don't want this problem, but there it is, and you're weighing things and you're indecisive. So part of it is a kind of chastening too, to the person who has lived inside words and books. What are their limitations to? What are the limitations of literature? What can they teach us? And once they teach us, what's our responsibility? What's our takeaway from it? And it's part of what I really admire and strove for in my classrooms, that I believe that education should be moral education, not just facts, not just content, not just things but that you use these things. And by moral, I don't mean that I teach a specific morality or content, but how do we use what we read and what we learn to help create a more beloved, humane, just world? How do we use that? And that's, a challenge all of us are feeling right now. But so that's how the philosophy is. And so I think I alluded to, when Lear is not just a character, a moving character, you know, in a play, but it's your own sister, you know, it's your own brother. Yeah.
I think that as we near the end of this week, urging us all to find the humanity together is a wonderful thing to think about. And it's a pleasure to hear that from such a legend as you, Julia.
Well, Rob, I was thinking before I came on tonight, I was thinking, well, you know, this is so wonderful we're doing this, because this is the antidote to the debates. We're not hollering at each other, calling each other names. We're not, you know, we're coming together, you know, and I think that's what we need more of. You know, maybe they should do a debate in which people talk about their favorite books and talk about what they've learned from them, and, you know, and no, nothing else, you know, and let's see what happens.
That is a debate I'd watch. It also is an excellent transition to the next question. But before we get to that, we're about to wrap up here. I do have a quick reminder for everyone. If you enjoyed tonight's talk and want to read Julia's brand new book, Afterlife, if you haven't read it yet, you really should. Click the link in the chat to purchase from our bookseller partner, Majors & Quinn. You'll also find a link to purchase books by our moderator, Annika Fajardo. So thank you so much for supporting these great authors and our local literary community. So the question is, Heather has asked, I can't wait to order Afterlife from my local bookseller. My question for Julia is, what is she reading now? And Heather sends her best wishes to you and for your husband's health. With love from Minnesota.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm not kidding. I just finished Annika's book, and it is so absorbing. I really encourage you to pick it up and read it. So that is my latest read that I really enjoyed. Right before that, I read the new book by Sigrid Nunes called What Are You Going Through?, which is also a book that very much speaks to this moment about, it's a beautiful quote. She got it from Simone Weil, however you pronounce her last name, who said that is the most moral, loving thing you can do, is to ask another, what are you going through? And stay for the answer. Listen, you know, it's a beautiful, again, a short, very lyrical novel. I also loved her earlier book, The Friend. My agents, my prior agent, Susan Burkles, her husband, Bert, told me years ago to read Jose Saramago's book, Blindness. And because it's been talked about a lot, because it is about a pandemic, a fictional pandemic, and, you know, it's in the title that everybody goes blind. It was riveting. I'm still haunted and will be by that book. So that's a book I really recommend. A beautiful book that I love to give away to people is by Kent Haruf, Our Souls at Night. That is such a wonderful, quiet book, but very, very beautiful.
A novella well matched with your own.
Sorry?
A novella well matched with your own, I would say.
Oh, well, thank you. But that I guess that starts people off. My list is endless. My worry is there's so many books to read and there's so little time. So I really envy people like Annika and like my character Sam that can read quickly, because I read like a poet every word.
One of my favorite passages from Afterlife is how you read prose as if it was poetry. Well, I should say Antonia did. I was hoping that you were the same.
Yeah.
I think the audience would be very angry with me if I didn't ask this. Even though you just put out this book, we have had the perennial question, Are you working on anything? And when will we see the next one?
I don't know, Rob. I wish that, like I said, I don't know how long it takes. And part of what I mentioned, and I really mean it, although I put pressure on myself, my people, my publisher, my editors, they're curious, my agent, what are you working on? And first of all, I never talk about what I'm working on, because once I talk about it, I encapsulate it, and then I've sort of closed it down. And even though it drives me crazy, I want to leave it open to possibility and for it to go where it needs to go. So I don't ever, talk about what I'm writing about, because part of it is that I don't know till it's done. I don't know till it's finished what it is. But I also mentioned that writing for me is like a meditation practice. It is a ritual thing. It is a way of life, a way I live my life. So producing a final product is not its goal, but the ongoingness of the work. Because I'm a writer, because I find that only when I'm writing do I integrate and understand things. So that writing is a way of understanding. And when I don't do it, when people, my husband will say, wow, you're spending a lot of time in your studio or whatever. I said, you wouldn't want me around if I didn't take this, I also meditate, and often slip of the tongue, I said, I'm gonna go do my medication. And I have to laugh, because I say, that's exactly right. And writing for me is a way of understanding and making meaning. Otherwise, I feel at loose ends and lost. I feel lost and at loose ends anyhow, but better than if I didn't do this.
Well, thank you so much for continuing to find the true pattern and to find meaning, and for your meditations. We're so lucky to call you a member of our literary community, our wider literary community. So that's about all the time we have for tonight. Thank you so much, Julia. I hope that you can join us sometime again in the future. Annika, I also just want to say, if you're listening, thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. If you want to learn,
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Annika. Thanks for popping back in. Thanks, Julia.
And to Rosa and Christy and you, Rob, and all you people out there that I didn't get to see. Who knows? Let's hope this is soon over and this can happen in real time, as they say.
We would love to see you again in Minneapolis. I'm sure of that. So
thank you.
If you want to learn,
Annika, with your book and promoting it, our little pandemic publications.
Yes, thank you.
All the readers they can get.
Yes.
So just remember, like I said a moment ago, buy Magical Realism, buy Afterlife. There are links in the chat. And if you want to learn more about the future Friends of Hennepin County Library events like tonight's, that link is also in the chat. Thank you so much to everyone watching from home. We miss you. We want you to have a good night, and we hope we get to see you again soon.
And
Bye,
vote.
everyone.
And vote.
And vote.
Yeah, vote. Okay.
Bye.
Adios. Gracias, Annika. Tan bella.
Gracias. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness.
Okay. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Stay safe.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Came to me in the snow. haven't had a drop of rain since the middle of May. Everything's dead in the fields, and everybody's saying that the county's gonna break the record for the lowest yield. Well, some people even try to truck the stuff in, but the heat just gonna suck it away. Shaking your faith down to the foundation, and you wonder at the end of the day, but you pray for rain. Fires have been burning in California for weeks. Folks out there been losing their homes. It happens every year, and there's no one to blame. Now there's Forest Service planes with all their water and foam. Well, out on the fire, there are lives on the line. A month ago, they trucked them all in. They looked to the sky for some kind of sign, hoping for a change in the wind, and they're praying for rain, praying for rain, praying for rain, praying for rain. Everybody's praying for rain. It's been 3 days now since we crawled out on the roof. Thank God we had the presents to thank. We brought out some blankets, brought out some food. Now all I see is water, but there's nothing to drink now. There's only one thought that keeps going through our minds. It's not without its own irony. I'm amazed we can manage after all of this damage